Lee and Blake Lovell here, talking SEC basketball action from Tuesday, February the 15th. Let's start in Knoxville, Blake, where the Vols were just feeling the flow from the opening tip, having gotten blown out by Kentucky a month ago. Tennessee in control of this one from start to finish. We'll hit on some Kentucky-related things, and especially the Ty Washington injury. But let's talk about the Vols first. They just keep doing what they've been doing lately in terms of what's won games for them. That's good guard play. That's contributions from a lot of people. And I was just really impressed with what the Vols did in that revenge match.
Yeah, I mean, this is a game that, as I said going into it, I was like, I feel good about Kentucky in this spot, and we will talk about the Washington thing. Of course, he didn't wind up playing very much, but still, this was kind of a prove-it game, I think, for Tennessee. And one thing we said coming into this was Tennessee's ability to make shots from outside, not only make 8, but they still shoot 47%. And we said, you keep looking back at this team, 42% against Mississippi State, 52% against South Carolina, 43%, 42% against A&M. So like when they've been able to play and kind of take some pressure off their offense, it's because they've been able to make some threes. They've been able to provide sort of a threat. And I think that the threes they made in this game, even though they only made 8 of them, a lot of them seemed like they were in big moments to where either they sort of prevented, Kentucky from making a run, kind of halted Kentucky's momentum. I feel like a lot of the threes they made in this game felt like that to me, where you make some that sort of halts that any sort of momentum from Kentucky and kind of sends you in the right direction. And I think that was a big part of it. Goes back to what we've talked about since they started making this run, is the balance. You've got to have balance with this team. You can't just rely on one or two guys, I think, to score 25 and hope to win. You've got to have everybody contributing, and they basically had that here. They had everyone that played significant minutes were able to give them something, and I think that's a big part of it. It certainly helps getting to the free throw line. I think that was also something that we always say. I mean, against Kentucky, the best recipe is to try to put some of their players on the bench, because if you can just get to the free throw line, rack up fouls, those kind of things. I mean, it wasn't a huge part of this game by any means, but still, when you get 20 of your points from the free throw line, that helps too. So yeah, it was a good performance from Tennessee. I thought that you could sort of just tell right away that Kentucky just did not seem to have its rhythm, couldn't match Tennessee, I think, in terms of look, this is one of those, this is like a college basketball game, like in terms of the setup, right? You have a team playing at home against their rival, top 5 team is the opponent, and you're jacked up for it. And we said coming in, right? We said either they can be too jacked up or it pays off. And it paid off here because they came out and played well pretty much the entire game. And yeah, they made the plays, and that was the difference here. Kentucky just could not make the plays in this game, and credit Tennessee, I think, for that. So.
Yeah, we talked about how important the start was, about how Kentucky had been good in those situations, and Tennessee might be looking to do a little too much. I don't think Kentucky ever led in that game. And we talk about roles for the Vols. John Fulkerson was really good last night. But the guy that's really catching my eye, Blake, every time I watch them is Zakai Ziegler. I'm not going to say he's the engine that makes them go, but boy, at times he seems to be. And then Jonas Adu, who has come just out of total obscurity, been pressed into playing time by the injury to Olivier Nkamhoua. I thought those guys were both really good, and especially Ziegler, who just is becoming more of a factor for them every night.
Yeah, I think Chandler and Ziegler were the ones for me because you mentioned Kentucky. They did have that early lead, but I mean, we're talking 3 or 4 minutes into the game. But that's where, from that point on, I felt like you sort of had Ziegler and had Chandler just being in on everything, whether it was making big shots. I think it was Chandler made those back-to-back threes, which I thought was such a big swing in the game about midway through the first half. And, that's one of those things where all of a sudden you're tied. I think he scored eight straight points, actually. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think that was right. Kentucky was up 17-15. Here it is. He scored 8 straight. So he made a jump shot. Then he made back-to-back threes. And I thought that was such a big part of the game because You go from being down 2, you're up 6, and that's where when you're at home, you can kind of push that. You can push that into a nice little run, and that's what they did. Eventually getting up. I think it was 32-18, which another Chandler bucket there, and Ziegler on the assist. So those two play really well off of each other, and I think that that's the key to Tennessee's success. Is before we were talking about it just in terms of Chandler. He had to be the guy. We felt like he had to be the guy that everything sort of flowed through. But now that you have other options, now you've had Vescovi, you have an All SEC type season. You've had Ziegler step up the way he has. And yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, I mean, that's where you got to have someone like Adu step up, because if you don't, you lose a starter, as we talked about, and that can make a big difference. So, I mean, credit Tennessee, it really was. I mean, I'm sure everyone will have a different opinion on the game and how it played out, but I think if you watch that entire game, I don't know how you look at that and say, well, that was only because Kentucky played bad. No, that was because Tennessee played really good. Kentucky didn't play their best game, but Tennessee was a big part of that. And also, as we mentioned, I think not having Ty Washington for his normal allotment, and even when he was out there, I don't, he plays 13 minutes. I don't even know what kind of your expectation was. To me, it never really seemed like he was right from the tip. So yeah, everything set up well for Tennessee, and they took advantage of it, and that's what you want to see from a team that you think has all this potential. And I think even though we were up and down on them for a little while there, I think you're finally starting to figure out that this team may be legit, and they probably are legit because they played as well as anyone over the past month since that last loss to Kentucky.
Yeah, they're 1 point from being unbeaten since then. That was a loss at Texas with the ball in the air with a chance to win, and it just didn't fall. But Tennessee 9 in the net this morning, and I'm wondering how far the Vols are from being a 2 seed, because the big wins are starting to stack up. They've got Kentucky. They've got Mississippi State on the road, which I would presume would remain a quad 1 win. They've got LSU at home. That'll be a quad 1 win. You go back Arizona, North Carolina. I mean, this team is really doing everything that it needs to do to put itself in position to, I think, have a 2. I think a 1 might be too much to bite off this point with 6 losses, but I think 2 to 3 is eventually where they settle.
Yeah, I think I think it's hard to get to that. I mean, unless they went out, I think they could certainly be in that conversation. But yeah, I mean, we've said it. Look, this was the first game that, in the SEC at least, I thought this was really the first game that, Tennessee had beaten a team arguably maybe not at its best, but close to its best. Because think about it, the one against LSU's playing, not having the full roster, and everyone else they'd beaten, we talked about this. Who was their best win aside from that? Florida, which does not look like a good win anymore. Mississippi State, they're not in the tournament. So, like, for me, this was like the first big win for Tennessee in SEC play. And they're 10-3 now, but it's just so much more significant because you've proven that you can beat a team like this. And, it wasn't an LSU team that was really struggling at the time. Yes, you've beaten South Carolina twice, you've beaten Vanderbilt twice. But as we said, then you've got wins over those teams that just seemingly are just stuck in the middle, like Florida and Mississippi State and A&M and teams like that. So this was a sort of defining win, I think, for Tennessee, just based on who they had beaten to this point in SEC play. It's not to take away anything from them, but this was finally beating one of those top-tier teams. And I think now, here you go. You get 3 more opportunities to do that. You got Arkansas twice. You got Auburn at home. So Tennessee's in a really good spot, I think.
Kentucky, I don't think anything changed with the Wildcats and how I view them. I still think this is a national championship caliber team, except if Ty Washington gets hurt, which happened last night. I don't know if it's fair to call it injury proneness or whatever it is, but this is what the third time he's been down. I think it was the same ankle this time, was it not?
I'm terrible at remembering these kind of things. So if it's the same one or not, I'm not sure.
Well, but I didn't like the way it looked when he went to the bench. He slammed the chair. He was clearly frustrated and feeling some pain. It didn't come back. And we've said all year that there is a noticeable difference with him on and off the floor. It's not like they don't have other guys They've got Xavier Wheeler. We've noted how many guys that can score, but he's a guy that outside of Sheboy is probably the best player on that team, and he just gives him a little boost, or not a little boost, a big boost when he's in there. And they clearly missed him last night.
Yeah, I don't think it's injury prone. Quite honestly, I was stunned that he played. And I know John Calipari said after the game he wished he wouldn't have played him, and I agree with that. I get that it's a huge game, but the way the injury happened against Florida, look, we talked about it. Why we re-recorded our video, because I was under the expectation that he was not going to play. I thought that was being very optimistic that he was going to play in this game, and yet he was still out there. And so I mean, that's when you second guess as a coach. I get it. If he plays 25 minutes, and it's different, I suppose. But still, I was very surprised that he played. And again, I'm not putting the blame on Calipari or anyone for that. I think it's just one of those things where that's a quick turnaround from what happened on Saturday to turn around and playing a game on Tuesday night, given the nature of the injury on Saturday, at least from what we saw, right? Like it looks significant. So, I mean, we're not saying anything we haven't said before. They're clearly a different team when he's on the floor. It just gives you one more option. It gives you, he's not going to be the SEC Player of the Year, but it gives you an SEC Player of the Year caliber player on the floor. And if he's not out there, that changes some things. That requires, Davion Mintz to have a big game, which I don't think he played bad here, but it's so hard to win, especially if Grady only has 6. Those kind of things. You're not going to win many games, no matter who you're playing, in those kind of scenarios where basically the rest of your guard group doesn't really have a whole lot, doesn't produce a whole lot. And we mentioned in the first game, Washington was a big reason why they blew out Tennessee in the first place. So his health moving forward is clearly the biggest storyline for this team. But, if he gets back to where he needs to be, yes, they're still a team that can win a national championship. But they got a pretty interesting schedule down the stretch here too. So yeah. I think it's they're one that I can't say I'd be shocked if Kentucky, maybe loses one of these games here that you don't expect them. I mean, at Arkansas is going to be a challenge. We'll talk about that. At Florida, to me, doesn't look like it's much of a challenge anymore. I will talk about the Gators in a second, but yeah, I think that's the thing. Until we know kind of the extent of his injury and what, if he can get back to 100%, I think that's where you have your doubts about, if he can versus if he can't. But still a very talented team, and I just think I think this was more about Tennessee than Kentucky. So,
yeah, their next 2 games, Alabama and LSU, but both at home. I think you have to sit Washington down just to make sure that he's a full go. You don't want that ankle injury or whatever it is just lingering and carrying on into March. I think at some point, even if the player doesn't want to do it, you have to do it for the team's good. I suspect you won't see him next game, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, these are 2 important games to me, though, because, and I'm not saying
they are, but Alabama on the road,
right? I'm not saying that he shouldn't. Yeah. I'm with you. I agree, but what I'm saying is, if you think about it, these are pretty important games because you still have to go to Arkansas and Florida. So, like, if you come out and don't play well against Alabama and LSU, you could lose both of those road games, and then maybe that's a little bit more, drastically different in terms of seeding. I don't think so. Again, I'd be shocked, right, if they go 0-2 against Alabama and LSU at home. But it's not like you're playing Georgia and, someone else. So
right,
it's different. But I think that's where still being at Rupp, I think, helps them in these scenarios. But if you can just win those 2 games, these next 2, then I think if Washington doesn't play, which we assume he's probably not, I would think against Alabama, but we'll see. Then I think it's all right. Even if we lose these road games to Arkansas and Florida, we're still okay. Those kind of things. So that's why I think it's not going to impact Kentucky. I mean, again, you don't want to be the team that if Kentucky drops to a 4 seed or something, I would not want to be that one that's sitting there waiting potentially in the Sweet 16 thinking, how did this team get to a 4? If Washington doesn't play or something and they struggle a little bit in some of these games. But, I think they're not overly significant, these next 2 games, but I think they're important just because of what's remaining. if you think that there's a chance you could lose at Arkansas. Again, I don't, unless something changes considerably with Florida. I don't see Florida matching up well in that game. But we'll see. So
We kind of thought Arkansas would go to Missouri and win decidedly, which it did, which, again, not easy to do. As we've mentioned, Missouri plays really well at home and has played everybody really well at home for a couple of months now. So that's not a performance that'll move the needle for Arkansas in terms of seeding or net or anything like that. Now, it is one that if they'd lost, it would have hurt them. So in a taking care of business game, I thought Arkansas did just that and did it really well.
sometimes you're just better than another team, and that's the case here. As we said, we'd be shocked if it was going to be 44-point game like it was the first time around, but none of us should be shocked that this was, a comfortable win for Arkansas because JD Note, for starters, is out there for more than a half. So he plays 35 minutes, 17 points, does his usual thing. But Jalen Williams to me is still continues to be the story.
Yeah.
He plays ties with Mude for 37 minutes, which Mude had a big game, 23. Those three guys are just so. Let's think about this too. We go back and we were talking about that game against Alabama, right? And sort of having those two guys, Note and Amude, based on their foul trouble on the bench and that kind of thing, like that was such a big part of it. But when these guys are on the floor, we've seen it during this stretch of games that they played. Those three guys are just, you'll take those three guys against a lot of trios in the league right now based on how they're playing. And so, yeah, and that just made it a challenge for Missouri. We said it. If Missouri doesn't shoot the ball well, it's going to be tough, and they didn't really shoot it well. So, yeah, I mean, this was a. If you're an Arkansas fan, this is what you want to see. You want to see them bounce back in a pretty convincing way because it's an opponent that's not as good as you are, and you've got this gauntlet left, right, with Tennessee, Florida, Kentucky, LSU, Tennessee again. So, yeah, I thought this was a not a flashy win. It's not one that everybody's just going to be talking about and going crazy about, but it's still an important win based on what you've got left and knowing that really the rest of the way, again, the Florida one's looking a bit more interesting now just because of they're heading in the wrong direction. But really, the rest of the way, you have so many opportunities to continue to increase your stock and your seeding in the NCAA tournament, and that's a good spot to be in for a team that started 0-3 in the league. So.
Should we just start calling Jalen Williams Oscar Tshiebwe light? Because that's 13 games in a row where he scored in double figures. That's 3 double-doubles in a row. I think he's got 8 for the year. Those two guys may be the most consistent players in the stat line night in and night out in the league anymore.
Yeah, I think I can back up my case now about putting him in our top 14.
I think he may make an appearance this week. Although, again, I cannot emphasize enough how brutal and deep the competition is.
Yeah.
Just to
I think
stop
he's
the
going to
haters
push
a little
out
bit.
one of those lower
Yeah.
three.
I think he
those are
probably will. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I'm with you. He's just been really good. He's just gotten better and better, and that's why Arkansas is playing as well as they are. You can point to Note and Amude, and yes, we all know they're huge, but I think Jalen Williams is the difference. Like he's the X factor to me for Arkansas in a lot of these games, and so yeah, he's just wildly important to what they do. So.
Blake, sometimes the Gator pops up and gets you, and sometimes he doesn't.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about Florida at this point. Although I will say I don't get many right, and certainly I didn't get the Tennessee-Kentucky game right. But what did I say about this game? I said, man, this feels a whole lot like Florida and Missouri from 2 weeks ago. And
Yeah.
what do you know? Another 1-point game here, but it goes in the wrong direction, and it sort of played out almost very similar to the way the Missouri game played, right? Florida has to rally. They get down. You think that they're done, and then they have to have this furious rally. But when you're up 4 points with a minute and what was it? Let me find this here. Minute and 44 seconds left, or whatever, minute and a half. If you're a team trying to play for the NCAA tournament, you got to win that game. There's no other way to put it. So you were down. You're playing just absolutely terrible basketball. You couldn't score. You had 30 points with 12 minutes left in the second half. Just not good. But against the Buzz Williams team, you kind of understand. I mean, let's think about this. Florida had 9 points in the first half with 4 minutes left, basically. And
You think
I
they
mean,
were
it's
asking if
just
those goals were regulation size?
maybe I don't know. Like it's just
I mean, they
this is
had a bunch of those last night.
such a frustrating team. And you know, I just we said going in, this is the game you can't lose. We said this specifically. This is a game that you simply cannot lose. We said A&M is going to get one sooner or later. And we talked about Tyree Appleby, right? We said if he plays, but he plays 34 minutes, but he only gets 3 points, goes 1 of 8 from the field. You're not going to win many games like that. But Florida was in a position to do it. But guess what? The being in a position to win no longer matters at this point in the season. You have to win these kind of games. And you also can't foul a 3-point shooter up 2 with 19 seconds left. It's just like, yeah, I just can't. Like Florida fans, I don't even know. I'm sure, if you chime in, if you're a Florida fan, you're watching this. I can only imagine kind of what your state of mind is right now about this team, this program. It's got to be frustrating because I don't even know what you say. I don't even know. Like to me, I mean, yes, like they've not played well on the road this year. We've talked about that, but that was just such a big opportunity against a team that had lost 8 in a row, and you had every chance to avoid just being thrown off the NCAA tournament bubble, and you just couldn't do it, even with a 4-point lead with a minute and a half to go. So this is the game I think Florida's going to look back on and realize that this was the one that perhaps cost them the NCAA tournament. But right?
Are you saying their tournament chances fell off a cliff and died on impact last night?
Well, but next 2 games are at home against Auburn and Arkansas. You beat one of those teams, things change. So that is what, at least for Florida, their 3 best opportunities left are all going to be in Gainesville: Auburn, Arkansas, and Kentucky. If you go 1-2, do we trust Florida to beat Georgia on the road or Vanderbilt on the road at this point? I don't know. And so probably Georgia, but I don't trust them to beat Vanderbilt on the road right now.
Those are games you have to win. They don't do anything for you, but you can't lose them. And that's a bad spot to be in. Yeah.
I mean, it was the same thing with the A&M game, and yet they lost it. So I don't want to point everything towards Florida here, but because you got to give A&M some credit too. This was a team that, as we said, was just close, and they just couldn't find a way to pull off some of these games. But good for them for finally winning one. They've got a pretty favorable schedule the rest of the way. They're not gonna be in the tournament, I think, unless they win out. But still, that's a significant win just to get off that losing streak. But the bigger story, like it or not, is going to be Florida coming out of this and wondering if they go 2-1 in those 3 games and you beat Vanderbilt and Georgia, then I think Florida's going to be fine. But that's asking a lot for a team that, to me, just doesn't look like they have it right now. So
we're focusing on Florida's failures, but A&M was due a break at some point too, and that's what made that game scary. Is at some point they had been so close, they were due to win one, and unfortunately for Florida, that just happened to be the one.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that they were going to win one eventually, and this seemed as good a spot as any. I said coming in, I'd be surprised if this game was anything more than a possession one way or the other. Now A&M was up more than I probably expected, but this was your prototypical 2-point game between these 2 teams, knowing what was at stake for both. And yeah, Florida now puts himself in a position where you got to finish, I think, 4-1 to feel comfortable. But man, with Auburn, Arkansas, Kentucky, at Vanderbilt, those are all losable games. I think they beat Georgia on the road, but that's a tough spot to be in, I think, if you're Florida. So
last night in Oxford, we had no clue how that game was going to turn out. It was a toss-up. James Reese V hits a shot from about 2 feet inside midcourt in overtime, banks in a 3 to win it, which I think that's the longest buzzer beater of the year in the SEC that I remember.
Yeah, I don't know many others. Yeah, I mean, this was a game, as you said, flip a coin. I don't even remember. Did I pick Ole Miss or South Carolina? I have no idea.
I think our official stance on that game is we have no idea.
Yeah, well, I
So,
think you know what, I think I picked Ole Miss. I think I would have, knowing myself without remembering specifically, I would have said I'm going to pick the home team here, and didn't work out there either. Yeah, look, man, I don't, I didn't take anything away from this game in terms of feeling any different about these two teams. Maybe we haven't really changed our opinion on South Carolina. We've said they're probably a team that could play the spoiler role here down the stretch, and they've still got LSU, Mississippi State, Auburn, Alabama. Um, would I be surprised if they beat one of those teams? I mean, I'd probably be surprised if they beat Alabama or Auburn, but probably not LSU or South Carolina, or LSU or Mississippi State maybe. Mississippi State's probably the one they'll have the best chance, but I mean, you just don't know, and that's where these two teams are at. They're just playing the spoiler role at this point. And for Ole Miss, I mean, you had some decent balance there from your top three guys, but beyond that, I think it's just the turnovers. We always say that South Carolina's not a great team, but they can force turnovers, and Ole Miss turned it over 18 times, and um, so yeah, my opinion doesn't change on either team coming out of this. So
all right, I'm going to give you a counterpoint on that. We've talked about how important Keyshawn Bryant is to South Carolina. I think he's had his best 3-game stretch of the year, probably by far. He has gone 16 points last night, 22 against Georgia, 18 against Kentucky. He played, 27 minutes last night, which is getting near the season high. He played 35 against Kentucky, but I think having him and Cousinard, we've talked about this all year. We talked about how Reese has been a guy that has done some good things for them on certain nights. I would say that our outlook on Carolina may change a little bit given the way that Brian is starting to play, which, again, I thought he'd be their best player coming into the year. So I would say that might be worth a consideration, that Carolina could get a little bit hot. I think right now they're in a great in a great place to avoid that Wednesday night game in the SEC tournaments. I would say you might just want to keep an open eye on that situation because they played. I'd say they played well more often than not the last month and a half.
yeah, I guess my thing at this point with them, and we'll find out over the next 2 weeks, they've still not beaten anyone outside of
Right.
they've beaten Vanderbilt twice, Georgia twice, A&M, and Ole Miss. You've beaten your 6 wins are all against teams that are not on the NCAA tournament radar right now. So that's where I think you can change that opinion if you beat an LSU, a Mississippi State. Again, I just find it hard to believe they're going to beat Alabama or Auburn on the road. But Missouri, they could certainly win at home. But yeah, that's what I'd like. I think these next 2 games, that's where if you're going to change my mind, the next 2 games will do it. Because if you can beat one of those teams, then I think you feel a little bit better about things for South Carolina. And maybe they're a team going to the SEC tournament. You say, all right, maybe they can win a couple games, upset someone, perhaps. But I think that'll be decided in the next couple games. So
Yeah, there's 7 losses in the SEC. 6 are against teams. Well, 5 are against teams that are probably heading to the NCAA tournament. One was Florida, I think, when Castleton was fully healthy, and then the other one was at Mississippi State, which we've noted has been a pretty good home team all year. So
yeah,
no bad losses in there.
but no good wins.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, they've beaten the teams that they should have beaten. You could say
Right.
that maybe they snuck one at Vanderbilt.
Look, you're an average team. That's what you do
Yeah.
if you're an average team. You beat the teams you should beat. You lose to the teams you probably shouldn't beat, right? And that's where they are. And that's why, they're not in the tournament conversation. So
Yeah,
that's where they can, yeah. And that's why I think beating an LSU or Mississippi State, LSU's in the tournament, Mississippi State not, but still that's a considerably better win probably right now than some of the others you've had. And perhaps the Vanderbilt, as we said, Vanderbilt's playing a lot better. Those wins maybe look a little bit better in a couple weeks, but otherwise, I think it's just, South Carolina's not playing for the NCAA tournament or anything. But I guess if you're looking for reasons to be optimistic, I think you find them if they win one of these next 2 games.
parting thoughts.
Nope. We will come back with thoughts on Wednesday night's games, which we already talked about. So check out that video. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly the biggest talking point coming out is Tennessee and Kentucky, and I think Ty Washington is the biggest storyline here moving forward to see what happens with him. So,
All right, he's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. We will see you again with preview videos coming up on basketball. We've got a wrap-up coming up tomorrow on action for Wednesday night. We start our baseball coverage, so be sure to look for that. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you're watching. We'll see you soon.